And if a baby has been traumatized, also, if there's been a lot of separation from the baby, I would refer now to a lot of the videos that I've talked about and have done on incubator babies. I think that being separated from your child as a result of the child being in an incubator or as a result of forced separation, you don't want to exacerbate the situation and create more separation. So I think that if you use a little bit of logic here, I think it would be easier to figure out what's best for you and your baby. So also, the Ferber method is not appropriate for children who have a conditioned fear of being left alone or who have a conditioned vomiting response, including traumatized kids. So children who have been traumatized by, for example, war, children who've been traumatized by some level of abuse, whether it be sexual abuse or physical abuse, should not be subjected to further separation from the parent. So it's really, really important to understand that when we look at what is healthy for the child, maybe we should mind map this so that we could be even more clear on what's going on and how to form a healthy human psyche. So if you could be so kind as to let me know when that, thank you. Mind map is up. So look at the first panel, childhood wounds, and the 5 main childhood wounds that I talk about are wounds of neglect, which would be the separation wound, wounds of verbal abuse, which of course a baby does not understand language, so that's not going to occur during the first 6 months of life. Then there are wounds of physical abuse. There are wounds of smothering, and that pretty much covers all of the wounds: neglect, smothering, physical, sexual, verbal abuse. So in panel 1, if we are wounded, which we all are on some level, some of us have larger wounds of childhood, some of us have a better opportunity to be nurtured by mom, dad, and the family structure. But if we are wounded, then we're going to move over to panel 2, reactions to these wounds. And these reactions have to do with the limbic system. It has to do with the amygdala, which is the emotional brain. And this is what fires up when we are uncontained, when we are unsoothed, when our primary caregivers do not mirror us, give us eye contact, skin contact, breastfeeding, consistency. When our primary caregivers are not attuned to us, then we become dysregulated, and as a result of this dysregulation, our cortisol levels grow up, our stress, our fight-flight system gets activated, we become psychosomatic, and these reactions are something that infants in particular are not equipped to deal with. Furthermore, the Ferber method is not appropriate as a treatment for most child sleep problems. So if your child is experiencing nighttime fears and separation anxiety, daytime stress, nightmares, snoring, or other forms of sleep disordered breathing, nocturnal headaches, inappropriate circadian rhythm, sleepwalking, night terrors. Of course, a 6-month-old or a newborn infant doesn't have that issue. But use your intuition. If you feel that your child is not equipped to self-soothe and to dial down their emotions, then you may not want to implement the Ferber method. And again, I do want to hear from you. I want to hear from mothers who have used the Ferber method, and you can call in anonymously. I do want to hear from your experience because this is a very controversial subject. As a matter of fact, the woman who requested this show said that she was part of a mother's group, and many, many people are fans of the Ferber Method, and then they will attack the people who aren't fans of the Ferber Method, and on and on. So I just thought that we could discuss this openly and honestly, and please chime in anytime. So what we see is that the conditions responsible for your child's bedtime problems are going to worsen if that child is not soothed. You put your child at risk for these problems to exacerbate if you don't intervene and put them on some sort of a schedule that is going to hopefully extinguish their crying behavior and soothe them. But it doesn't always work that way, because sometimes children get too upset. They become too dysregulated, and in some cases they will start vomiting. So obviously watch your child and see how your child does with some sort of a graduated extinction method, whereby you check in on your child less and less and let them basically work it out themselves. So in terms of these nighttime conditions that I talked about, sometimes the child will go to sleep once these conditions are worked through. So if the nightmares are worked through, if the terrors are worked through, then automatically your baby should be in a better position to get better sleep. So does the Ferber Method not teach the Ferber Method does not teach children how to fall asleep. The Ferber Method is focused on letting the child resolve their own way of soothing themselves so that they can fall asleep. Richard Ferber acknowledges that graduated extinction doesn't teach children how to fall asleep. They are simply denied access to their parents and left to work it out for themselves. So is there anybody out there that has used the Ferber Method? Please, I want to hear from you. 323-843-2826. So just to move to the topic of how to develop positive sleep routines so that maybe you don't even have to use the Ferber Method and your child will fall asleep just by virtue of the fact that you attend to some significant points. These are some points that will be very helpful in allowing your child to fall asleep. So here are some suggestions. Suggestion number 1, dim the lights in the evening. Another suggestion, avoid exercise and stimulating activities before bedtime. Another suggestion, that if you're breastfeeding, avoid stimulants such as coffee or hard to digest foods before bedtime. And of course, if the child is experiencing some sort of terror, then you want to comfort your child and not put them on any schedule but their own. One suggestion that parents seem to not be too averse to is to let the baby work it out a little bit. You don't have to pick up your child and wake them up if you hear little grunts and noises. That is not necessary. You don't necessarily have to wake your baby up to soothe the baby, because that doesn't make intuitive sense, does it? Babies make little noises, sometimes they whimper, and that's not what we mean by attuning to the baby. That baby could work those little grunts and groans out. It's the bigger emotions that we need to attend to, because as parents, we are their emotional thermometers. So I want to talk a little bit more about attachment theory, which I've talked a lot about. But let's go into it, because we can see what attachment theory says. Attachment theory is about creating a secure attachment to your child and developing a deeper bond of connectivity between you and your child. I believe that attachment starts with a family that is ideally intact. So if we go to panel number 3 on the mind map, let me use that DNA strand as a metaphor for the two parents that are raising the child. So if we have a mother and we have a father, we have what I call the pillars of the family. And when we have pillars, the children can rest comfortably in the arms of the parents. When parents are stable, what I mean by stable is that they've worked through a lot of their own emotional issues, when there's no drugs in their system, when they have a stable family where they're good enough parents, meaning that economics are good enough, that the mother is able to breastfeed, eye contact, skin contact, stay at home for the first part of the infant's life. When all of that is intact, when the secondary caregiver, usually the father, is able to nurture the mother, the system gets stronger, because the mother, who's the primary nurturer, has to be nurtured in order for her to be the giver. And if all of this is going on, then we have a really calm family. The fight-flight system is dialed down, and everyone can benefit from a system gone right, because the mind map, in essence, is a tracking of a system gone wrong. So when we're talking about the Ferber method, we have to understand that a lot of families are already systems gone wrong. And so if you take a system gone wrong where the baby is not soothed, breastfed, the baby is doesn't have stable family, then it may even worsen the situation by trying to artificially impose more limits and constraints on the baby. So back to attachment theory, attachment does not have to be reciprocal. One person may have an attachment to an individual which is not shared. Attachment is characterized by specific behaviors in children, such as seeking proximity to the attachment figure when upset or threatened. And this is Dr. John Bowlby, 1969, and the article is from Simply Psychology, Developmental Psychology, Saul McLeod, published in 2009. Attachment behavior in adults toward the child includes responding sensitively and appropriately to the child's needs. So when I look at the Ferber method, I have an automatic response to it, but I decided to keep a much more open mind, because now that I know a little bit more about it, because I've been reading up on it, I understand that Ferber didn't mean to take a newborn baby and apply this kind of intermittent, graduated extinction method on a newborn infant. I think, again, we have to look at the intention behind the Ferber method, and we have to take the whole family gestalt into consideration. And in doing so, we have to understand that we live in a world of human disconnect. That's why the show, Dr. Judy WTF, is about healing human disconnect. That's why my book, Be the Cause, is about healing human disconnect. And I think that because we're so disconnected, the very least we can do is offer our babies during the first months and years of life healthy dependence. And that is also something that we as parents have to be sensitive to. And, it is not true that just because a baby doesn't cry that they're okay. It may be that they have gone into a state of learned helplessness and a state of hopelessness. So here's something that's been on my mind about the Ferber method, is a lot of parents might think, wow, my baby's not crying, everything's okay. Well, everything may not be okay. Maybe the baby at that stage is learning that the environment is not responsive to his or her needs. So the baby starts giving up in this process. Martin Seligman talks about learned helplessness. So if we go back to the mind map, now we're looking at wounds of childhood of emotional neglect. And we're looking at reactions that range anywhere from crying and vomiting all the way to reactions such as shutting down. And when we look at panel number 3, which represents our encoding, how we encode all of this information, the baby may be pre-verbally encoding messages like, I'm ineffectual in the world, or I don't matter, or my feelings will never be attended to, or later on formulate messages, core beliefs, negative core beliefs like, I'm not good enough. And as most of you know, this kind of nonverbal, pre-verbal, and later verbal messages that encode into the fiber of our being become the hot button that gets triggered by life. And so I've seen in my practice many mothers in particular who will come to drop off their kid and say, hey, Dr. Judy, my child has a lot of anxiety. My child has a hard time separating from me. And then, of course, I take a thorough history, and oftentimes I find that the attachment parenting has not really been instituted into the household. Maybe that child went to daycare too early. The mother didn't have time to nurse the baby or give the skin and eye contact and so on. And so that child has never really learned to regulate. And so the mother might think, well, fix her. I mean, do something, do some behavior modifications so that she'll learn to go to sleep. And of course, I have to then educate the mother and educate the family about the cause. And the cause is always this human disconnect. And the human disconnect starts with mother-infant disconnect, father-infant disconnect, and then the reverberations are felt within the child and the child's inability to self-soothe. So what does that mean later in life? It looks like anxiety. It looks like panic attacks. It looks like inability to let the mother go when the bell rings at school. It looks like a lot of tantrums. It looks like a lot of psychosomatic manifestations of insecure attachment. So again, we have to be really, really sensitive to our children. We have to know our children. And before we go jumping on or off the bandwagon of the Ferber Method, we have to take inventory of what we're doing to secure their attachment. Because certainly if you're going to use graduated extinction on a child after 6 months who's been securely attached, and a child who's been breastfed, and a child who's been receiving a lot of internal nutrients, as I call them, the Ferber graduated extinction method may not be as dramatic as on a child who didn't have those emotional nutrients, so to speak, met. So again, this is a call-in show, everyone, and please call in 323-843-2826. And if you're chatting it up in the chat room, then come chat with me and pick up the phone and let's discuss it and let's get some controversy around it, because I also understand the other end of the spectrum, which is the parents. Parents want a good night's sleep. Parents don't want to be at the beck and call every moment for the rest of their life. They don't want to be at the beck and call of their children, because then they're tired, they're grumpy, and their parenting skills go down the tubes. So how do we balance this out? So this is why I want to hear from you. How do you balance this out? How, as a human race, are we supposed to give our children their needs and at the same time take care of ourselves and self-care so that we get the good night's sleep too and we wake up refreshed? So going back into the developmental psychology and attachment theory, John Bowlby also talks about the importance of the child's relationship with their social, emotional, environment, namely their mother, and the impact that that bond has on their social, emotional, and cognitive development. So, one of the things that I talk a lot about in treatment is the fact that people who are not functioning at their optimal level are not doing so because they're busy licking their emotional wounds. What I mean by that is that when you have to attend to your inner world, when you have to spend a lot of energy managing your own emotions, then it's going to be difficult to study. It'll be difficult to have hobbies. It'll be difficult to live in the external world. And my observations and also my experience as a psychologist, as a mother, working with many, many patients and reading a lot of material on the subject, is that it is important to foster this kind of a healthy dependence with our children so that they can have those secure roots that will allow them to naturally and slowly push us away, which brings me to the topic of separation and individuation. So if we look at the process of separation and individuation, we could see that babies by age, let's say 2 years old, they're starting to play independently, and then they'll do something called checking back with their parents. And so they'll play and they'll wander off a little bit, and then they'll check back. And if there's somebody that they can reference back to, it'll give them more security and more confidence to venture forward, and so they will. And so this check back method and this way of the parents securing their being there for the child allows the child to push away and separate and individuate. The Ferber Method, on the other hand, creates the separation. So from that point of view, I'm not really fond of creating the separation. I'm more fond of the separation organically growing out of the needs of the child. And some of you might be saying, yeah, but what about the parents? What about the parents? What about their need to sleep? Well, two things. Okay, realistically, yeah, we need our sleep. So if it's really, really important and it not practical to pick the baby up, and I'm talking about after 6 months, you might want to try some form of gradual extinction. So maybe give the kid a minute to try to self-soothe. And then if that doesn't happen, pick your baby up and soothe your baby. And maybe next time, see if the baby can soothe in a couple of minutes and extend that period of time. I don't like the idea of leaving the room. I don't like the idea of that baby not having a human being to turn to, because again, I believe that stress on the baby will increase their cortisol level, will increase their anxiety, and eventually they may stop crying, but not for the reasons that you think. They might stop crying because they've given up, and they might stop crying because they feel that they have to shut down because there's nobody responding to them. So these are the things to take into consideration. So attachment theory, I believe anybody who is a parent or going to be a parent, I think it's really important that you read up on attachment theory because there's just so much good information. There's good information on attachment parenting. I believe that there are groups out there, mothers, fathers who raise their children with attachment parenting. And I don't think the Ferber Method is on the must-read reading list for these parents. In any case, John Bowlby worked alongside James Robertson in 1952, and he observed that children experience intense distress when separated from their mothers. Even when such children were fed by other caregivers, this did not diminish the child's anxiety. So what does this say about the mother-infant-parent bond? It is vital. It is vital to the mental health of our children. So how much we want to manipulate it, how much we want to extinguish it, how much we want to play with it, I think becomes a very delicate situation and must really be considered. Bowlby proposed that attachment that can be understood within an evolutionary context, that the caregiver provides safety and security for the infant. And so literally walking away from your infant and not letting them know that you're present, I just don't see how it aligns with attachment theory and the need for that child to feel that they are safe and secure. Attachment is adaptive as it enhances the infant's chance of survival. So being that this show is focusing more on cross-cultural issues, if we look at our cross-cultural history, we could see that evolutionarily, our biggest predators were animals. And evolutionarily, it was really important for us to stay very, very close to our infants and protect our infants. And so naturally, the mother-infant bond was strong because the families would co-sleep and the child would feel the mother's warmth, and the mother would feel any sort of anxiety or distress within the child, and of course protect that child. And so we've come a long way from that sort of parenting. And so the other day I was actually talking to a mother, and I was talking to her about the show tonight, and she said that she used to put her child on a mattress next to her bed so that she could just reach down and pick up her child and comfort her child and put the child on a mattress and let him sleep near the floor, so even if he rolled off the bed, so to speak, he wouldn't hurt himself. And of course, this was at a very young age, so the child supposedly wasn't able yet to crawl away. And that way she can toss and turn in her sleep and get a good night's sleep, and then wake up and breastfeed the baby and put the baby down next to her. And I just thought that was an excellent way of doing things. So if we look to cross-cultural ways of parenting, we can see mothers who wear their infant in slings across their shoulders, heart to heart, skin to skin. When we look at the animal kingdom, we could see that animals stay really close to their young, and they're available 24/7 to breastfeed. So I'm a big fan of looking to patterns of nature. And if we look to the undisrupted natural ways of nature, then I think that we can look to our animals for some ways to parent. And our animals are programmed to stay close. They're programmed to respond to their young. They're programmed to keep their cubs, for example, safe. Their natural instinct is to give them boundaries, the little swipes that they give them to keep them in line, and also to be available and watchful of their infants. So I think as close as we could get to that way of responding to our children, the better we will be. So let's go back to the Ferber Method and see what more they have to say. Studies leave important questions unanswered. So they say, what about the older babies? Advocates of graduated extinction training note that there are no studies that yet have demonstrated that the Ferber Method harms children over 6 months old. Yet, as I read along further into these studies, there really haven't been any good studies. So it's really, really difficult to say. They don't have many great controlled groups, and then there are other factors to take into consideration, such as how do these parents parent, what are the wounds of their childhood, How are they in terms of attachment parenting during the first few months of life and so on. And these factors have to all be taken into consideration when doing a controlled study. The Ferber method stands in stark contrast with the cross-cultural, and even the people who use the Ferber method acknowledge that it stands in sharp contrast to cross-cultural evolutionary norms for infant care, which is for babies to fall asleep in the comforting presence of caregivers. So remembering that the amygdala, the emotional brain, can get easily dysregulated, it makes sense that cross-culturally families know that it is important to stay close to the infant and to soothe the infant when that infant begins to cry or the infant becomes distressed in any way. We need to address crucial aspects of the quality control of these experiments. And again, there have been no experiments, so we can't conclusively say that the Ferber method is good or bad because, first of all parents in the treatment condition must follow the same procedures. That's really difficult because some parents actually drop out of the plan because they can't stand letting their babies cry. Parents are really different in the way they attend to children's needs in the first few months of life. So all of these factors, they just can't control for allowing for a true controlled study. And I would like to hear from you. The number to call in is 323-843-2826. And please note that anxiety and depression and mood dysregulation are one of the biggest reasons why the phones at the Psychological Healing Center ring. And because people are not properly regulated in their emotions, because they do not receive eye contact and skin contact and breastfeeding and stay-at-home parenting, they do not receive the attunement necessary, they then become dysregulated and remain dysregulated later in life, and oftentimes will need to resort to medication, anti-anxiety medication, Xanax, and so on, and other forms of anti-anxiety medication to do what we as parents need to do for our children, which is to regulate them. So I think that we really need to go back to basics, and we need to take note from cross-cultural behavior, and we need to note the behavior of the animal kingdom and go a little bit more organically in the way we respond to our children. And I think that if we can do that, I believe that the levels of anxiety, the levels of emotional distress will become much more relaxed, that they will start dropping. These levels will start dropping. And I think that as we give our babies more in the first few months and years of life, they will become hardier. And as a matter of fact, I see that they will become even more independent if we let them separate and individuate gradually and let them push us away. It's a better way for them to develop that healthy independence. So I want to talk a little bit more about what the Ferber method looks like, because this is really what it is here. The Ferber method departs from extinction training in one key aspect. It permits parents to check in on their children. That's good, but only briefly and according to a strict schedule. So technically what it looks like is the first night of the Ferber method, parents put their children to bed or their child to bed, and then they stay away for 3 minutes. Okay, that's a long time to a newborn infant. 3 minutes is not long to us, but it sure is long when you're in distress. After a brief check, during which the parents refrain from picking up or holding the child, the parents leave again, and this time for 5 minutes. Well, if you're only 6, 7, 8 months old, 5 minutes is a really, really long time. And if you're in distress, especially if your child, let's say you had a bowel movement, or your diapers are really wet, or let's say you have a stomach cramp, or let's say something got in your eyes. Well, I think that the Ferber method treats it too generically. It's assuming that the only reason the baby is crying is because they want to be picked up. And the reason that they're wanting to be picked up is because they're spoiled. Well, I don't think babies are really easily spoiled. They have needs, and if we start respecting their needs, then I think, again, as I said before, they will have a better chance of separating and individuating in a healthy manner. And then the last phase of this treatment is that the parents stay away for 10 minutes between visits until the child finally falls asleep. And then for each night that follows, parents gradually increase the time between checks up to, let's say, 20 minutes or more, which is a very, very long period of time. Some parents who try Ferber sleep training see improvements, which that's great. Some babies may respond very well. And some parents may completely see a huge improvement with this timed interval training within 4 weeks. And I guess that's why people still use the method. Another thought that I have is that parents may misinterpret the Ferber method in that a lot of people don't know that you don't use this on newborn babies. If you're going to try this out, do not try this out with a newborn baby. The newborn baby needs to be on an as-needed schedule. So because the Ferber method is now just a generic term, I know that when my children were infants, my doctor told me to not pick my child up real early in life. He didn't say to me, well, don't start this training until your children are 6 months old. So I think that it's subject to misinterpretation, and then a lot of damage can be done. And so that's why I'm glad that we're doing this show, because we've got to clarify these points. You don't start a newborn or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 month old infant on this method if you're going to do it at all. And we must understand that our children need our nurturance to help them attune. And the more attuned they are, the more calm they're going to be, and they'll be less likely to end up in therapy and be knocking on the doors of the psychological healing center or any other doors. And there will be less need for that parent to distress about her child being unable to fall asleep at night at age 5, or her son to be stressed out about going to kindergarten and hanging on to her skirts and not wanting to let go. And these kinds of separation anxiety disorders are born out of the panel 1 wounds, the cause, which is the parents' inability to really provide that infant with the nurturance and allow that child to develop emotional bandwidth. Now, the Ferber method thinks that if you let the child cry it out, they will develop emotional bandwidth because they're going to have to learn how to self-soothe. And sure, you can't, one of the injuries, the panel 1 injuries, is smothering. So you can't smother your child, nor can you allow your child to cry it out for so long or cry it out in inappropriate circumstances. So again, I think that when we as parents can work out our own childhood injuries, when we as parents can be as solid a rock as possible for our own children, I believe that we will then better be able to follow our instincts. So just a few more comments about the Ferber Method. Children who complete training are less likely to throw bedtime tantrums. These are the proponents, obviously. Children who complete training are more likely to settle down at night within 10 minutes. Children who complete training are less likely to awaken their parents during the night. Parents who complete training report improvements in their own stress levels, moods, and interactions with their child. And I think this would be the ideal outcome, and this would be in a situation where the child is truly able to have the emotional bandwidth to sustain such a training, meaning that they probably would have been fed the psychological nutrients during the first few months of life to be able to tolerate this kind of behavior modification. For parents enduring nights of sleeplessness and emotional turmoil, these outcomes are extremely important. Advocates of gradual extinction say that parents who are sleep deprived are at a higher risk for depression and marital conflict. So, yeah, I can see the point that we want our babies to let us sleep so that we can feel fresh. There is a definite point to that. Again, we need to be sensitive. Again, we need to take into consideration our own tolerance level. We have to take into consideration the child, and we have to understand that sometimes children stop crying not for the reasons we think they do. There are alternatives to the Ferber Method. There are other programs that have a gradual extinction that don't require leaving your baby to cry it out for long, or don't require that you leave the room after a while. And so if it's important for you to at least look into it, I would look into all of the above. And again, go with your instincts. And I think we have a call in. So, yeah, hi, you're on the couch with Dr. Judy.
Hi, Dr.
Hi.
Help you.
Who's this?
This is June from Germany.
It's June?
Yes,
Hi, June. How you doing? Thanks for calling in. Are you the June that sends me a lot of comments?
I am.
You are. Wow, I'm so glad to talk to you. Thank you. So, what do you think of this topic, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't have children myself, and I did send you that this be the verse poem about not having any children yourself by the English poet, but nonetheless,
Okay. Yeah, right. Okay.
mother who was diagnosed by my psychiatrist as a narcissist, likely a narcissist.
Okay, who was diagnosed that way?
Mom,
Your mom. Okay, and where are you calling from, June?
Germany.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. I love cross-cultural thoughts and opinions. Yes, so your mom was diagnosed with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, now I hear you much better. So go ahead. Did you have a thought or question?
Yes, I just wanted to say that she was pretty much a fan. I, of course, grew up in the United States. I'm a citizen, but I'm just living in Germany temporarily.
Okay.
But she was a fan of not picking a child up often.
Okay.
And beyond that, I don't know a whole lot. I mean, I don't think she left us always to cry, but she said, you don't always pick a child up. I don't know.
Right. And I just thank you for that comment, because it's hard to know. Is the mother, consciousness is causal. Your intentions are causal. So go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add that comment, and the same way with my nieces and nephews. So I don't know.
We're breaking up a little. Is that on our end or on your end? If you could say that again.
I don't know if she was that way when it came to dealing with my nieces and nephews, but
Okay.
she was very uh, not a fan of picking children up all the time, and she said a lot of times children have to cry it out. So I don't. I guess that's the Ferber method.
Okay. Okay. So let's put this whole discussion in a different context since you brought it up. So let's say we're dealing with a narcissistic mother who is about herself anyway. Wouldn't it be intuitively correct to assume that people who are narcissistically injured themselves would want to put themselves before the child? Because that's what narcissism is the inability really to empathize and put the child's needs first.
Yes.
Okay, so I think the Ferber method would be perfect for mothers who have narcissistic tendencies, but I don't want to generalize it too far because again, consciousness is causal. So if you're coming from the consciousness of trying to establish a schedule and you're truly coming from that consciousness of creating a win-win situation for the parents and the child, I can kind of see how parents might want to try it. Okay. If you're in a consciousness of selfishness and you're in the consciousness of not wanting to be bothered by a crying baby, well, that sort of changes everything, doesn't it?
Does.
Okay, so then the Ferber method is just an example, an extension of that mother's inability to really attune to the baby, and she's more interested in attuning to herself than attuning to the baby. Does that make sense to you?
Does. It explains an awful lot.
Okay, okay. Any other thoughts or questions? You still there, June?
I am. No, ma'am, I don't have anything else. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're welcome, and continue to comment and call in. It was really, really nice to get to talk to you. Thank you so much for calling in.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, you too, June. Take care. So that was such a great question, and it sort of brought this full circle. So consciousness is causal. As I say in my book, Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect. And in my mind map video series, which is now available for you to view, and in every message that I put across in the therapy room, I teach to my beautiful staff. And by the way, I have a wonderful staff of people, including an awesome life coach, Yitz Epstein, who has appeared on a couple of episodes now. I think at least one episode. And he's doing an awesome job and offers sliding scale fees for people who cannot afford to pay for the other members of the staff. And so what we're busy doing is healing human disconnect. And consciousness is causal. Please remember that message, because if you're in the right consciousness, then you're in the consciousness of best interest for the baby and also best interest for self-care. And if you're in a narcissistic consciousness, you're in the consciousness of best interest for self and self alone. And with that said, I'm going to jump to the tune that was chosen by my wonderful song picker, Heather Dykes. It's called Cry Baby, and here are the words. They're pouring out where everyone can see. They call you cry baby, but you don't effing care. Cry baby, so you laugh through your tears, meaning it sounds like there's a disconnection from the baby and an insensitivity, a lack of empathy. Cry baby, because you don't effing care. Tears fall to the ground, you just let them drop. So kind of like the Ferber method, the tears fall to the ground, but you don't really attend to that child. Cry baby, you just let them drop. You just let them drop. I look at you and I see myself and I know you better than anyone else. So the baby's intuiting the mother, maybe thinking, well, maybe mom doesn't love me after all. And I have the same faucet in my eyes, so your tears are mine. So there's the connection of sadness between the baby. They call me crybaby, but they don't effing care. Crybaby, how I laugh through my tears. Tears fall to the ground, I just let them drop. I just let them drop. You can just let them drop. They call you crybaby. I just let them drop. You just let them drop. So I chose this song because it really emphasizes that if you're coming from the wrong consciousness, selfish consciousness, then you're really unattuned to the baby and you just let the child drop. And one last question, how do you know if it is a healthy push or not? Well, for sure, between 0 to 6 months, it's not a healthy push away. And then you have to examine your own consciousness. Why are you pushing that baby away and letting that baby drop? Is it because you're so bothered by that baby, or is it because you're a little bit bothered by the baby and you want to have a full night's sleep? And then you want to also understand your baby, because if the baby is going silent for too long and giving up, then you know it's not a healthy push. It's not a healthy push away. Remember, healthy dependency creates healthy independence. So with that said, I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for your thoughts, and June for calling in, and have a great night, everybody. Good night.